I always knew Thanksgiving would be a battlefield, but somehow I still walked into it unarmed. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 36 years old, and I own a small secondhand bookshop in a restored railway station in Portland, Oregon. To me, the place is magic. The creak of the wooden floors, the scent of old paper and leather, the thrill of finding a forgotten first edition hidden on a dusty shelf. But to my parents, it's nothing more than a cute hobby, a distraction until I supposedly get a real job. Daniel, my younger brother, is their pride. He's 32 and lives in Seattle, running some booming tech company that I don't even fully understand. He drives sleek electric cars, vacations in Greece, and posts smiling pictures with his perfect family on Instagram. At every family gathering, my parents roll out the red carpet for him. My father, a retired CPA who measures success in stock portfolios and retirement accounts, loves to rattle off Daniel's latest business milestones like he's reading a shareholder report. My mother, a former private school teacher, beams like she's on stage whenever Daniel talks about his company's IPO plans. And then there's me, the underachiever, the one who, as my dad likes to joke, sells dusty books to pay the electric bill. The truth is, I stopped caring about their definition of success years ago. My shop isn't just some quaint little storefront, it's my sanctuary. I spend my days restoring old manuscripts, carefully binding fragile spines with linen threads, and searching for rare editions that tell forgotten stories. Every time I bring a battered, water-stained book back to life, I feel something no paycheck could give me, a sense of quiet accomplishment. Of course, my parents don't see it that way. At every holiday dinner, the conversation turns into the Daniel show. Did you hear about Daniel's latest deal? Oh, Daniel is flying to New York next week for meetings. First class, of course. If I dare to mention my shop, they smile politely, nod, and move right on as if I just said I started a knitting club. I've learned to smile through it, to let the spotlight rest on him while I fade into the background. But sometimes, especially when I'm driving home alone afterward, I feel that familiar sting. It's like no matter how hard I work, I'll never be more than the quirky daughter with the bookshop. The irony? I've quietly built something solid. My store's modest success has grown into something far bigger than they realize. I've made careful investments over the years, but I keep that to myself. Maybe part of me likes the freedom of being underestimated. Still, every time my mother leans across the table and says, "Daniel really inspires us with his drive," I wonder if I'll ever stop caring about their approval. Maybe I should have said something years ago, but I didn't. I swallowed it all, the comparisons, the subtle jabs, the way they speak about me like I never quite measured up. But this year feels different. I'm tired of playing the quiet, overlooked sibling, and something tells me that before long, they're going to see just how wrong they've been. It started with a box of junk at a yard sale. I was 29 at the time, still struggling to keep my shop afloat. The place had been open barely a year, and every month felt like a fight between paying rent and buying inventory. One Saturday morning, I was combing through neighborhood yard sales looking for cheap books when I spotted this plain wooden box tucked under a table. Inside were a few old travel journals, the kind most people would toss without a second thought. One of them caught my eye, a leather-bound diary, brittle and stained with age. Something about the handwriting, the neat yet hurried script, felt deliberate. I paid $10 for the whole box, figuring I'd flip the books for a few bucks each. Back at the shop, I started reading the journal. The entries were filled with vivid descriptions of icy landscapes, treacherous seas, and nights spent under endless stars. At first, I thought it was just an old sailor's log. But then I saw a name, Captain Elias Wainwright, scrawled on the inside cover. The name sounded familiar, so I started digging. Weeks of research led me down a rabbit hole of maritime history and archival records. I finally confirmed what I suspected. I was holding the lost diary of a famous Arctic explorer whose final expedition was thought to have vanished without a trace. I'll never forget the day I called the auction house in New York. The specialist on the other end of the line sounded calm, too calm, as if she didn't want me to realize what I had. A month later, I watched the diary sell for $75,000. $75,000 from a $10 box at a yard sale. I didn't go on a shopping spree. I didn't even upgrade my beat-up station wagon. I took that money and started what I now call Silverleaf Archives, a small private company on paper, but really my secret lifeline. I learned to buy undervalued manuscripts, rare first editions, and historic documents, sometimes from estate sales or dusty attics. I stored them carefully, studied the markets, and sold them at just the right time. Fast forward to today, I own not just my bookshop, but the entire building it's housed in, a restored railway station with beautiful brickwork and iron beams. I also own two off-site warehouses packed with rare books and artifacts. My investment portfolio, built quietly and methodically over 7 years, is now worth over $12 million. But no one in my family knows. To them, I'm still the sister who can barely make rent, the woman who spends her days dusting old novels for pocket change. And honestly, I prefer it that way, at least for now. The sky was already dark when I pulled into my parents' driveway, my old station wagon wheezing like it was begging for retirement. I had baked a pecan pie that morning, the smell of caramelized sugar and roasted nuts filling my kitchen, and wrapped a restored 1920s book press as a gift for my dad's workshop. Both sat on the passenger seat, reminders that I always came prepared, even when I knew I'd be treated like an afterthought. Inside, the house smelled like turkey and rosemary. My mother greeted me with a quick hug and an automatic, "You made it, Emily," before glancing over my shoulder at the sound of a sleek car pulling up. "Daniel's here," she exclaimed, her face lighting up like it was Christmas morning. Sure enough, Daniel and his wife, Brooke, strolled in, looking like they'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Their kids bounded through the hallway, chattering about their recent vacation in Greece. Brooke immediately launched into a story about the Santorini sunsets, showing off photos on her phone while my parents hung on every word. I stood there holding my pie, waiting for someone to notice me. They didn't. "Emily, could you peel these?" my mom said finally, tossing a bag of potatoes onto the counter as if I'd been waiting for instructions. "Sure," I said, grabbing a peeler. Daniel breezed past me, still in storytelling mode. "Our IPO is just a few months away," he told Dad, who beamed with pride. "It's going to be huge." "That's incredible, son," Dad said, his voice warm in a way I never heard directed at me. As I scraped the skins off the potatoes, I listened to their conversation, feeling like a stranger in my own family. Brooke chimed in with talk of their new Tesla and the spa resort they'd booked for Christmas. Every achievement, every luxury was applauded like they'd discovered fire. Dad turned to me at one point, almost as an afterthought. "Your shop still open, Em?" he asked, not even looking up from the carving knife he was polishing. "Yeah, still open," I said. Good, good, he mumbled, already turning back to Daniel to ask about tech stocks. I swallowed my irritation, focusing on the rhythmic scrape of the peeler. This was just another Thanksgiving in the Carter household. Daniel on a pedestal, and me peeling potatoes like the hired help. Dinner was nearly ready when it happened. I was in the kitchen, rinsing the last of the potato starch off my hands, my phone plugged into the counter outlet next to the coffee maker. Daniel strolled in, hunting for a charger. "Is this yours?" he asked, already picking up my phone without waiting for an answer. "Yeah, but it's—" I started, but before I could finish, the screen lit up with a notification. His eyes flicked down and I saw his smirk falter. Emily?" His voice was sharper now, cutting through the hum of conversation in the next room. "What's this?" "Congratulations, your net worth has surpassed $12.4 million. The room fell silent, the way it does when someone drops a glass in the middle of a party. Daniel walked back into the dining room, holding my phone like it was evidence. "Is this real?" My mother blinked, fork hovering midair. "What are you talking about?" Daniel turned to me. "You're sitting on $12 million? Are you kidding me?" I stepped into the doorway, my pulse quickening. "Yes, it's real," I said evenly. "Why?" The questions came like rapid fire. "Where did you get that kind of money?" Dad demanded, his voice a mix of disbelief and suspicion. "Is it from something illegal?" Mom asked, her tone hushed but sharp. "Were you hiding it from us on purpose?" Daniel added, eyes narrowed. I took a deep breath and sat down at the table, suddenly very aware of how much I hated being interrogated in my parents' dining room. "It's mine. I earned it. Years of rare book research, auctions, and investments. Every penny of it is legal." Brooke raised an eyebrow. "Wait, you're telling me your little bookshop made you rich?" "It's not just the shop," I said calmly. "I've been buying and selling rare manuscripts for years. I invest. I own property. I've built something, even if you all never cared to ask." Dad's jaw tightened. "You mean you've been sitting there letting us believe you're barely scraping by while you've been, what, hoarding millions?" "Hoarding?" I echoed, letting the word roll bitterly off my tongue. "No, I've been working. Quietly. Without fanfare. Unlike some people, I don't post every accomplishment online." The table stayed quiet for a long moment. The only sound, the faint clink of Daniel's wine glass as he set it down. My mother's lips pressed together like she was chewing on something sour. Daniel let out a short laugh, the kind that hides irritation. So all this time, while we thought you were barely keeping the lights on, you've been secretly loaded? That's insane. I met his gaze. You've always assumed I was failing. Maybe you just never noticed I was succeeding in my own way. The silence that followed was heavy. The turkey sat untouched. The tension at the table didn't fade. If anything, it sharpened. Daniel leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a look that was half amusement, half calculation. Well, he said finally, I guess that changes things. You could help out, family stuff, like Ellie's private school tuition. It's about time you chipped in. I blinked at him, stunned by the casual tone in his voice. Excuse me? It's not a big ask, Daniel continued, swirling his wine like he was negotiating a business deal. You're single, no kids. You have more money than you could ever need. Why not help your niece get the best education? It's just reasonable family sharing. My mother perked up like he'd handed her an opening. Daniel's right. Emily, honey, you don't have many expenses. And Ellie's school is so good for her. You've seen how smart she's getting. It's something you could do for the family. Brooke chimed in, her voice sugar-coated but pointed. It's not like you're using that money for much. I mean, you still drive that old station wagon. I felt my throat tighten. For years, I'd swallowed every insult, every comparison, but now they weren't just belittling me. They were treating my success like a communal wallet. Are you kidding me? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I worked for every dollar I have. Years of research, taking risks, getting rejected by auction houses, learning everything the hard way. I didn't get here by chance. Daniel waved a hand dismissively. We all work hard. That doesn't mean we hoard our money when the family needs help. Hoard? I repeated, heat rising in my chest. I don't owe you my savings just because we share a last name. You've all spent years treating my business like a joke. Now suddenly I'm good enough to pay your bills? My father, who had been silent so far, finally spoke up. Nobody's saying you owe us anything, but if you cared about this family, you'd contribute. That's what families do. I laughed under my breath, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Contribute? I've spent my whole life contributing, just not in ways that you respect. I don't measure my worth by how much I can give you. The room fell quiet. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, the weight of their judgment heavy on my shoulders. My mother opened her mouth as if to say something else, but I couldn't take another word. I need some air, I muttered, pushing back from the table. I stepped outside into the cold night, the wind biting at my cheeks. For a moment, I just stood there on the porch, breathing in the silence. They would never see me as anything but the underachieving daughter, even with millions in the bank. The cold air cleared my head. I stood on the porch, staring out at the dark suburban street, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses inside. My breath came out in sharp puffs. I could feel the anger boiling beneath my skin. Years of swallowed words, years of being dismissed like I was some harmless hobbyist who didn't know how the real world worked. For a moment, I considered getting in my car and driving back to Portland, leaving them all behind. But something in me shifted. I was tired of walking away. When I stepped back inside, the room went quiet. Everyone must have felt the change in my expression, because even Daniel paused mid-sentence. I took my seat slowly, but I didn't reach for the food. I'm not doing this anymore, I said. My voice was calm, but it carried an edge that silenced the chatter. What do you mean? Mom asked, furrowing her brow like I'd just insulted the turkey. I continued, I'm done being treated like my life doesn't matter unless it benefits you. For years, you've compared me to Daniel like my bookshop is some silly dream instead of an actual business. You laughed at what I do, and now that I have money, suddenly I'm valuable? Daniel leaned back, his smile fading. Whoa, Emily, no one's saying you're not valuable. Yes, you are, I cut him off. You've all said it over and over, every holiday, every family dinner. You've made me feel like I'm less than. And I let it go because I thought maybe someday I'd earn your respect. But I don't need it anymore. My father's face tightened. We're just trying to be practical, Emily. We're talking about family support. Family support? I said, my voice rising. Where was that support when I was working 18-hour days just to keep my shop alive? When I was skipping meals because I couldn't afford groceries in the early years? None of you cared. You only care now because I have something you want. The room was still. Brooke looked uncomfortable, staring down at her plate. I stood, pushing my chair back. I love you all, but I won't let you guilt me into giving away what I built. I don't owe you an explanation, and I sure as hell don't owe you my money. Nobody spoke as I walked to the door. The only sound was my father's sharp breath and the clatter of Daniel's fork hitting his plate. The drive back to Portland felt like shedding an old skin. My station wagon rattled along I-5, the same way it always did, but I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't playing the part of the quiet, overlooked daughter who smiled politely while everyone else decided her worth. When I unlocked the door to my bookshop that night, the smell of old paper and varnished wood wrapped around me like a blanket. My assistant, Sophie, had left a note on the counter in her tidy handwriting. Found a 1902 Whitman in the latest batch. Couldn't wait for you to see it. Sophie was 24, fresh out of college with a history degree, and had more curiosity about rare books than I'd seen in anyone her age. I saw a lot of myself in her, that hungry fascination with the forgotten and the fragile. The following Saturday, she brought it up again while we were cataloging new arrivals. You know, she said, carefully stacking a set of leather-bound Dickens novels. I wish there was a place that taught this stuff, like book preservation, archival methods, all the things you've been teaching me. I smiled. You're learning faster than I ever did, I told her, but her words stuck with me. The next week, I posted a small announcement on our shop's website and social media. Free weekend workshops on book preservation and archival basics. I figured maybe a few curious locals would show up. I was wrong. The first class had 15 people crammed into our back room. Local history buffs, librarians, even a retired museum curator. They were genuinely fascinated as I showed them how to clean and repair a crumbling book spine using wheat paste and Japanese tissue paper. They asked questions. They listened like I was teaching them something precious. By the third week, we had waiting lists. Word spread quickly through the Portland history community. Soon, I was getting calls from small museums and university archivists asking if I could consult on their collections. Sophie and I expanded the workshops, running them twice a month and adding a small, hands-on lab space in the shop's loft. That's when the idea for the Silverleaf Scholarship hit me. I pulled a small portion of my investment income, just enough to start, and announced a yearly scholarship for independent projects on literary conservation. Within weeks, I had applicants from across Oregon, including a single mother trying to restore her grandmother's handwritten diaries and a high school student building a digital archive of local civil rights letters. I'd never felt prouder. Not because of the money, but because people were seeing me for my knowledge, not my bank account. Sophie grinned one afternoon as we packed up supplies after class. You know, she said, you're kind of becoming the person for this in Portland. Everyone talks about you like you're some book whisperer. I laughed, but her words warmed me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. I was building something real, not for my family, but for me. Thanksgiving came around faster than I expected, but this year, I decided it would be on my terms. Instead of driving to my parents' suburban home, I sent them an invitation, a simple handwritten note asking them to join me at the renovated loft above my bookshop. I spent the morning cooking a modest dinner. Roast chicken instead of turkey, roasted vegetables, and a small pecan tart. The loft smelled of cinnamon and butter, the air warm from the oven. I set the table with mismatched vintage plates I'd found at estate sales, a collection I loved because each one had its own history. When my parents arrived, they were quieter than usual. My dad's greeting was a stiff nod, my mom's hug hesitant. It was the first time they'd seen my loft, with its exposed brick, old train station windows, and floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with rare books. This place is different, my dad said as he looked around. It's beautiful, my mom added softly, almost as if admitting something she hadn't been ready to say before. Over dinner, the conversation was cautious at first. My parents asked about my classes and the scholarship I'd launched. For once, the questions weren't laced with condescension. So, these workshops, Dad said, slicing into his chicken. People really come to learn how to fix books? I smiled. More than I ever expected. We've got historians, students, even museum people. It's become something I'm really proud of. He nodded slowly, and for a moment, I thought I saw something like respect in his eyes. After dessert, I brought out a small box. Inside was a silver bookmark I'd found months ago and had restored myself. It had an old engraving of a short family poem that my grandmother used to recite. I thought you might like this, I said, handing it to my mom. She ran her fingers over the engraved words, her voice catching slightly. Emily, this is beautiful. I can't believe you remembered this. I remember a lot of things, I said with a smile. There was a pause before my dad finally spoke. We were wrong, he said, his voice quiet and awkward. To measure success by Daniel's standards, I see that now. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was something. As they left that night, I realized I felt no bitterness. I didn't need their approval anymore. I'd built a life that felt whole, with or without their praise. Winter came early that year, the kind that made the city feel quieter and more reflective. At the shop, business was better than ever. But what excited me most wasn't sales. It was the energy that came from the community we'd built. The workshops had grown beyond anything I imagined. By January, Sophie suggested something I hadn't even considered. You know, she said one afternoon while we were organizing a shipment of antique bindings, we could expand this into something bigger, like a preservation lab. We'd have the space if we used part of Warehouse B. I laughed at first, but she wasn't joking. A lab? I repeated. Think about it. A dedicated workspace for restoration projects. We could partner with museums, universities, maybe even publish research. People already look at you like you're the expert around here. This could put Silverleaf Archives on the map. The idea stuck. I spent weeks running the numbers, and by spring we opened the Silverleaf Preservation Lab, funded entirely by a portion of my investments. We hired 2 additional archivists, both local graduates, and the shop officially became more than just a bookshop. It was a hub for learning, collaboration, and conservation. The scholarship grew as well. The first batch of recipients sent me updates that nearly brought me to tears. One letter came from a single mother who was restoring her family's heirloom Bible, which had survived a house fire. I never thought I'd have the tools or knowledge to do this, she wrote. You've helped me keep a piece of my family's history alive. I can't thank you enough. I read that letter over and over, realizing that this, not the money, not the silent victories, was the kind of success I had always wanted. By summer, we were collaborating with a regional museum on a special exhibition called The History of American Bookbinding. It featured pieces from my personal collection, along with hands-on demonstrations of restoration techniques. Watching visitors light up as they learned how a book from 1870 could still be saved made every late night worth it. One evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall outside my loft window, I sat at my desk with a journal, the same kind I used when I first opened my shop. I ran my hand over the leather cover, feeling the familiar texture, and started writing. Worth isn't what they see, it's what you choose to build. I closed the journal and glanced around at the shelves stacked with history, the warmth of the lights reflecting off the old brick walls. I didn't need Daniel's life or my parents' approval to feel complete. I had built something lasting, something that mattered, and for the first time I understood this was my legacy.